Welcome to Portal to the Past, a short history podcast to teach you about the important historical events that are often left out of the school curriculum. I'm Evie and I'm currently studying history at A-level. Today we're going to be talking about the Watergate Scandal, which is a scandal in the 1970s that resulted in the end of President Nixon's presidency. So, in the early hours of June the 17th on 1972, which was 5 months before the US presidential election, 5 burglars were uncovered in the Democratic National Committee's headquarters in the Watergate Hotel, and this is situated around a mile away from the White House. However, this was no ordinary break-in, and it was actually a sequel to a similar event that had occurred previously, during which the same 5 men took copies of highly classified documents and were also wiretapping the phones. Since their wiretapping had failed previously, they had now returned to finish the job. However, subsequent investigations by the FBI into the nature of this entire affair highlighted that all men were actually linked to the White House as well as CREEP, which was the committee to re-elect the president. And this committee was in charge of the campaign which Nixon was running to try and get re-elected. The address books of 2 of the burglars linked them to someone called E. Howard Hunt, and he was a former member of the CIA, as well as a prominent member of CREEP. So this was when the affair began to look suspicious, because it was obviously this illegal scandal that was now being related to the president. The investigation uncovered the illegal and completely unethical behaviour of CREEP, which involved many bad things such as money laundering, wiretapping, and even the harassment of activist groups. And it was also discovered that Hunt and a fellow CREEP member called Liddy were situated in a hotel opposite Watergate, and they were actually using walkie-talkies to instruct the 5 burglars throughout the break-in. So this is when the ties to the president and the White House as a whole were starting to solidify, and the event was becoming very suspicious. So initially, after the scandal was revealed, Nixon declared that no one in the White House was involved, but later this was revealed to be a huge lie. Secretly, Nixon had been engaged in a huge cover-up, and he paid extortionate amounts of money for the burglars' silence to stop them linking it in any way to CREEP or the White House. The CIA were also used to block the FBI's investigations that were looking into the funding, where the funding for the burglary came from. Now, this is a clear abuse of the president's power, but despite this, he obviously managed to maintain an appearance of innocence, because in the re-election in November 1972, he won with around 60% of the popular vote, but this is definitely not the end of the scandal. In January 1973, 7 men, who are now better known as the Watergate 7, were put on trial for their involvement in the scandals. 5 of these pleaded guilty, and the other 2, so was Liddy, as I've mentioned previously, and also one of the burglars, McCord, were convicted, charged with conspiracy, wiretapping, and burglary. However, it was later revealed by McCord, so one of these 2, that senior White House officials had pressured him into giving false testimony to disguise the administration's involvement in illegal activities. So at this point, the cracks were really beginning to show in the White House and the involvement that they'd had in this affair. Soon, some of Nixon's closest advisors also began to crumble. To avoid being used as a scapegoat, John Dean, who was the presidential counsel, agreed to cooperate in the investigations, and also some of Nixon's other closest advisors resigned, which wasn't exactly looking great for Nixon. It indicates guilt if all your closest friends are resigning around you. So this problem only became exacerbated for Nixon when witnesses began to expose the truth. The most impactful revelation was that of Alexander Butterfield, who was actually a previous official in the White House. And he described how all the conversations and the phone calls in the Oval Office since 1971 had been recorded. Initially, Nixon tried to deny the recordings and he refused to give them up. But after moves were made against him in regards to impeachment, he was forced to release these tapes. And on the 8th of August, Nixon resigned, and he is the only US president to have ever done this. In total, there were 69 people that were charged in relation to the scandal, and 48 of these were found guilty. So it was a huge operation, and the ones found guilty included some of Nixon's key staff members. However, Nixon continued to try and declare his own personal innocence in the affair, saying famously, "When the president does it, that means it is not illegal." Also, later, when President Ford came into power, he pardoned Nixon of all of his crimes, which freed him from impeachment and prosecution. However, there is still a long-lasting impact of Watergate that remains, and it's largely been credited as the cause of the polarization of US politics. And that means basically how the Republicans and the Democrats are getting further and further away from each other and less likely to cooperate from each other. And this was kind of seen immediately after the scandal, and it's still increasing today, as we can see in modern day politics. One question raised in regard to the scandal was actually whether Nixon was the main investigator of the entire scandal. Not investigator, instigator, sorry. So whether he, planned the scandal or whether he was directly behind it. However, this is actually deemed unlikely, and there is a taped conversation of him speaking to his chief of staff, and he's aggressively questioning who did it, which seems to indicate that he didn't instigate it himself. However, what was condemnable in Nixon's behaviour was his blatant involvement in the cover-up of the affair, which obviously is unforgivable for a US president. Another distinct feature of this scandal was the role of the media, which played a massive role in conveying the news to the public and bringing down Nixon. So particularly the Washington Post, due to its two reporters called Woodward and Bernstein, and many credit these two reporters and their investigations and their reports with actually helping Nixon being brought down. So these two reporters were successful in helping bring him down, and this is largely due to a source that they had inside the FBI, who was known by the codename Deep Throat. Initially, he was anonymous and people didn't know who he was, but in 2005, he was revealed to be Mark Felt of the FBI. He provided them with vital clues. The most notable of these, and actually a phrase that's pretty famous now in regards to this affair, which was "follow the money." And when doing this, Bernstein, so one of the two reporters, actually discovered that one of the 5 burglars had been given a $25,000 check, and this money was actually taken from Creep. So this was a huge part in linking Creep to the affair and proving the guilt of the White House and its entire administration. So we can see there how big a role the media played in bringing an end to the scandal. The final thing that I want to discuss is the parallels that can be drawn between this affair and the recently ended rule of the former president Donald Trump, who only recently just lost the presidential election to Joe Biden. So Trump was president for 4 years, and many argue that there are similarities between the character of the two reigns, to put it that way. So some argue that Trump simply said in public what Nixon said in private, and the reactions between the two are different because we, as the people, have learned from Nixon's scandal, so we're more well prepared to deal with this in the future with presidents like Trump. And there's also obviously a similarity between the scandals that involved Trump throughout his reign and the scandals involving Nixon, particularly in regards to the impeachment. And although Nixon obviously wasn't impeached, he escaped that, but it's a very similar character. So what is interesting is that today many argue that throughout Trump's period of power, we were simply actually watching history repeat itself, just in a different form. So that's the end of the podcast on the Watergate scandal. I hope you enjoyed, and feel free to check out my channel for other podcasts. Last time I discussed the Overbury affair, so I recommend that. And yeah, thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed.